Confusion occurs when you have a conflict between two opposing voices. It could be opposing voices in the outside world or the inside world, or it could even span a relationship between inner and outer and inner. The point is the same. You don't know what to think, what to believe, perhaps how to act or how to orientate yourself because you're confused. You have an input of at least two opposing viewpoints, or at least partially opposing viewpoints, and possibly more than two. This is a psychological event primarily built on the fracturing or the dissembling of the self into various parts, as we try and explain it in human psychology. Sometimes we call them subpersonalities, sometimes we call them introjects or internal images or complexes, many words perhaps for the same thing or different nuances that ultimately bring about confusion, because we have no solid center. We hear that conflict in the outer or say the inner worlds, and we feel confused and we're not able to act with integrity or in terms of our wholeness. Now when this condition arises in the human being from a psychological point of view, you use it of course to learn about yourself, about your inner life, about who you are, about how you yourself may be repressed and dominated by these voices, perhaps none of which is yourself in your authenticity. So from the point of view of what we call inner work, and if you're in therapy with a counsellor or a therapist or a guide of some sort, this is all grist for the mill. You work with it, you find out, you get familiar with your inner world, and the people who inhabit it through their expressions, which you interpret as confusion when they're not in agreement, when they're not in harmony with each other. In spiritual work, there's a different perspective on this, since the mind itself is the organ of separation, as opposed to the heart, which is the organ of wholeness. When you notice confusion in spiritual practice, essentially you want to dump it as soon as possible, but then the assumption may be, and it may or may not be valid, that you have dealt with your psychological material and you understand the fracturing of yourself and the different voices that may lead to bewilderment or confusion. Always assuming you have, and there's a residue of confusion or a weak moment or some kind of point of indecision, for example. In spiritual practice, you're less invested in unpacking the deeper meaning, the source of the confusion itself. What you do, therefore, most often, although there may be exceptions, is you simply leave it. It's not of concern what your mind does. Your mind may think all kinds of thoughts, bizarre thoughts, outrageous thoughts, creative thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts, virtuous thoughts and sinful thoughts. But the mind is the mind. It's a thinking apparatus, and it creates fantasies and narratives of imagination, on and on. And if in spiritual practice you find yourself concerned about the state of mind, then you move away from that field. You simply let it go. You breathe perhaps and allow yourself to release it energetically, and in the out-breath, or you perhaps imagine it going into the earth beneath your feet, or perhaps just into the ethers. It's not a primary concern because spiritual challenge, spiritual endeavour is different to psychological challenge and endeavour, and the practices are very different too. So confusion may be met on a psychological level as a means to learning about the self, and confusion may be met on the spiritual level in spiritual practice as a means to prioritizing and know what's important and what can be simply left alone. If you stop thinking about confusion, if you stop feeding it, if you stop in any way supporting it, if you in a sense ignore it, it goes.